Owen Morris, I believe you are voting no. Owen, why are you voting no?
First of all, I'd say I'm not a member of any political party, nor do I have a vote in the Seanad. I feel that to abolish the Seanad is an attack on democracy. I think it's a safeguard against tyranny and autocracy. And just because a fire escape in an apartment complex is never used doesn't mean it should be torn down and sold for scrap metal.
I'm going now to Professor John Crown. John, you are advocating a no vote, voting no, and you're with Democracy Matters.
I'm not actually with Democracy Matters, but I'm with the broader umbrella of folks who are voting, who are opposing on. I'm supportive of what Democracy Matters are doing. Miriam, my position basically is I am hugely disappointed that the Taoiseach, who should be here tonight, who should be engaging in debate, and who has been has conducted a campaign about the most fundamental change in our Constitution for at least 70 years with such dishonesty. And I hate to say this, I've been thinking about this all day, but I will use the word. We're being told lie after lie after lie in the course of this campaign. Lies by people who know better about the money. Lies by people who know better about what the Seanad actually does. It is not just a watchdog. It is not primarily there to block laws. It's there to improve laws. 550 amendments in this Seanad alone. One third of all legislation on our statute books originating in the Seanad. This sort of, canard that we're hearing, that because we've never, to paraphrase my colleague earlier, that because we've never actually used the smoke alarm, we should get rid of the smoke alarm, is absurd. Now, in return for that, he's offering us an IOU. And he's offering us an IOU which states basically, you give us your Seanad, and at some undetermined future stage, we will give you the kind of true political reform we need, reform which, if we had had it 10 years ago, might have prevented the catastrophe. And the question is, do you trust him? Is his creditworthiness good on that IOU, considering he's been kicking people who are experts off committees rather than putting them on committees for no other reason other than they were politically inconvenient? I do not trust him in this.
Thanks for that, John. Joe O'Connor from the Union of Students in Ireland advocating a no vote. Isn't that right, Joe?
Yeah, well, I suppose there's a huge amount of political apathy out there with young people, and particularly with our members. But we certainly don't feel that this referendum offers real reform. We ourselves have proposed political reform proposals within this document that would reform both the Dáil and the Seanad. But just to come back to the point on the creditworthiness, do we really believe and trust a government that claimed that they were going to bring about real political reform, and within the lifetime of this government have established the Economic Management Council, which is essentially 4 senior politicians and officials that determine and control the economic decisions of this country, that are going to empower committees, which they say the Seanad is undemocratic, which it is, and that it lacks expertise, which it does, but at least it has limited expertise. Committees at the moment under this government have completely no democratic function, and the expertise is completely determined by the Taoiseach. We have seen an international banker removed from the Finance Committee because of a conscience issue. We've seen scientists removed from the Health Committee because of Roscommon Hospital closure, which was something that Fine Gael committed to before the last election. So do we really believe that the same government that has failed over the decades to deliver reform on the Seanad, are they now going to deliver reform on the Dáil?
Joe, I'm going to stick with our audience, and I have Anne Fitzpatrick. Anne, I think you're a no voter and you're a barrister.
I am, and I'm also an independent in terms of I have no party affiliations. I guess the reason that I would be voting no on Friday is twofold. I guess it's 2 questions. What next and what's the rush? In terms of what's next, I feel that we're being asked to abolish the Seanad, which will comprise 72 amendments to our Constitution. In return, we get a 7-page Dáil reform note, not a legislative proposal, a note, 3 weeks ago, which contains rather flimsy Dáil proposals which are not concrete. So essentially, we are being asked to reform our Constitution in return for nothing. We have no proven Dáil reform in its place. This matter has not been put to the Constitutional Convention and has been steamrolled. And just to point out as to what's the rush point, I would say that what is the rush? I feel this is a cynical measure that's been taken on the eve of yet another austerity budget. We could have had this referendum having had a transitional phase with meaningful Dáil reform, and we could have had this when we could see whether or not the Seanad was fit for purpose.
OK, thanks for that, Anne. Glenna Lynch, Democracy Matters. Glenna?
Miriam, I think we need to focus on what happens if we actually go out and vote yes on Friday. There's been very little talk about it. The dishonest and cynical posters that are all across the country are really just the wrapping paper around a hand grenade that is being dropped on the Constitution. I think we need to be deeply worried about the type of thing that we are giving up, the rights that we are giving up. We need to be very worried about why the government would want to sweep away so many of our constitutional rights when they didn't even need to sweep away some of them to achieve the abolition of the Seanad. Those things are in place for us. They have protected us for a long time. And unless we go out on Friday and give them away, they will protect us and our children and our grandchildren into the future. And I think it's critical that people look at the impact of voting yes, because we are giving something away, we are not receiving something. The only really safe vote on Friday is a no vote. The only vote that is going to hold open a door to any kind of meaningful political reform or transparency is a no vote. And we need to remember one thing, and I will take it with me on Friday. Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Okay, I'm going back to the audience for a moment. I want to bring in Patricia McKenna, actually. I think Democracy Matters, are you, Patricia, or aligned to that point of view?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I'm actually very disappointed by a lot of the parties on the left who seem to have bought into this mantra of, saving money and getting rid of politicians, which sounds very popular. But the bottom line is what we're actually voting for, or what's been put to the people, is to get rid of the Senate before there is any chance of it being reformed. And it's quite clear the cards are on the table. There's huge public support for a reform of the Seanad. And what happens, what I'm surprised at is why the Seanad is not being reformed to ensure that we have proper scrutiny of EU legislation. We've one of the lowest scrutiny mechanisms in the EU. And if you look at it, what's going to happen? For example, you have Enda Kenny has pushed this forward, and you'd wonder what the agenda is. Angela Merkel is standing over his shoulder waiting. You know that corporation tax is on the agenda. There was supposedly a triple lock there of the government, the Dáil and the Senate. Now the Senate is gone. Will Angela Merkel get her way? There is absolutely no guarantee.
Blair Horan, Sarah Jane Hennelly, very quickly, you're a no voter, Sarah Jane, are you?
I'm a no voter. I'm not affiliated with any political party, but for me, you touched on that issue there. The things that people really care about are economic issues, and we've had this referendum thrust upon us with there's basically either disengagement or there's absolutely no interest in it, and I think it's all a red herring. It's a complete distraction from the real issues that people are concerned about, and it's a gross waste of taxpayers' money. I think even this whole thing about discussion, we can't even get our leaders out to discuss it. I'm hastening to add that I'm part of the Fianna Fáil party here because I'm going for the no vote, but I mean you're all the same, and it's just assuming popularity as well on your part. It's popularity contest, and it's
Iceland is back. Remember, every one of its banks failed back in 2008. The country has since rebuilt its financial system and its economy, but the road to recovery remains long. Iceland is still grappling with capital controls and angry foreign creditors who were not made whole in that banking collapse. Plus, it is grappling with its future in global trade, and the battle over the Arctic. With us now to discuss all of it is Icelandic President Ólafur Grímsson. Mr. President, thank you for spending time with us here on Market Makers.
Great pleasure to be with you.
I'm not quite sure where to begin. Let's talk about the Arctic. You have made efforts to bring China into this conversation.
Well, not only I, because at the last meeting of the Arctic Council, China, India, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, in addition to Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, are all now sitting in one way or another together with the US and Russia and the rest of us at the Arctic table.
But do you feel as though you share, when it comes to an interest in the Arctic, it's pretty easy to see why Iceland has an interest in the Arctic. You're not particularly far away. China, a little harder. Why do you share? Do you feel as though you share interest in China in the Arctic?
There are two fundamental economic interests. Why the Arctic is fast becoming the new economic playing field of the 21st century. One is that the Arctic is one of the richest regions in the world in terms of mineral, oil, gas, rare metals, as well as clean energy and fisheries. And the second reason is with the melting of the Arctic sea ice, we are now seeing already a new sea route, the Northern Sea Route, shortening the distance between Asia and the US and Asia and Europe by 40%, meaning that for 3 or 4 months of the year, you don't have to go through the Suez Canal. you go through the new Northern Sea Route. And that's why we are already having discussions about new harbors, new depots, new shipping lines. And at this Arctic Circle conference, the middle of October in Reykjavik, the CEO of COSCO, which is the biggest Chinese company, will come and explain why China is already preparing to use the Northern Sea Route for a big part of their global trade in the 21st century.
You're leaving New York and going to Russia. What is your goal in those conversations? How do you hope to engage the Russian government to help you on this mission?
Well, in a very interesting way, President Putin of Russia has been very constructive and positive.
Do you consider Putin a partner?
Absolutely, yes. I think you cannot develop the Arctic sufficiently without a positive Russian engagement. And although I know in the discussion here in the US is somewhat different, the fact of the matter is in the last 5 years, Putin and Russia has been very constructive. So I'm going to Russia from here on Sunday night for a meeting with Putin and other Russian experts up in Saligard to plan out how the Arctic development will respect the environment, will be based on science and knowledge. And if we are going to use the Northeastern Sea Route, we have to have a Russian cooperation. And with the American presidency of the Arctic Council coming up in 2 years' time, it will be very important to engage in this discussion not only with Russia, but also with the big European and Asian countries that are now in the Arctic neighborhood.
Well, you mentioned Europe. Do you see Iceland ever becoming part of the EU? The talks seem to have stopped now, but ultimately...
No, I have never really seen the interest for my country to become a member of the European Union. Like Norway, like Greenland, those North Atlantic neighbors we have all deemed it to be in our long-term interest to stand outside the European Union because of our location, the resources, the policies, but of course the European Union is a very, very constructive partner for us.
So at this point, economically speaking, who do you feel closest to among those countries that we've been talking about? Do you feel as though Iceland shares the most interests with Europe? Does it share more interests with Russia, China, or, say, Canada and the United States?
Well, first of all, the U.S. has been a long-term ally and partner of Iceland since the Republic was founded in the middle of the last century. And one of my reasons for coming here again and again to the U.S. is to help to continue that strong relationship. Secondly, the Nordic countries and Germany and Britain have always been our strong European partners. But increasingly...
But the strength of that bond broke down during the financial crisis.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, I had to face a situation where every government in Europe was against our policies and our decisions. And I think events have shown, if I may say so, honestly, that we were right and they were wrong. And in addition, we are seeing in recent years that these big emerging Asian countries are now coming and engaging with us in terms of new sea routes, the new economic reality of the Arctic. We are having fascinating discussions with Singapore, for example, about this new global shipping in the Arctic, because once the Suez Canal is no longer the main venue, Singapore also wants to have a part of the new Arctic shipping.
Well, you were right while other countries were wrong. What about creditors right now? Creditors who are owed money from Icelandic banks, when can they expect to get paid?
Oh, they are being paid. Of course, if you take the 3 Icelandic main banks, they are all getting what they got, the depositors and so on. Those who speculated with their money in the market have to face this is a capitalistic system, like here, like there, and if you play that game, you also take risks. But in terms of ordinary people, they are all going to be paid. So we face the fundamental question, do we let the taxpayers bail out the banks? Or do we let those who wanted to play the money-making game in the banking system face the risk? And we decided to let that be the main course.